want to talk about. I want to clear some of my stuff, having to do with what's going on internationally with Israel and over in the Ukraine, and but also in the family courts and all the trauma that's over here. And I want to kind of get re-regulated again by talking about the pathology that we have that we're looking at. And so the pathology that we're dealing with, it's a one thing. It's the same pathology in the family courts that it is in Israel right now. It's pathological hatred, pathological violence. It's just different strains of that particular pathology. And essentially, the pathology is evil. And that's what I want to talk about today is the pathology of evil, what we have in the family courts, what we have in Ukraine, what we have in Israel, what we have in school shootings, in racist lynchings, in that whole domain that I refer to as the terrorist mind. One of the problems in identifying pathological violence and pathological hatred is we have normalized it throughout our history and called it war. We use this euphemism. We call it war, and then we glorified it, the brutality and the savagery of it throughout our history. So now that we're emerging into greater sanity because our traumas are starting to resolve, um, we we continue to use this euphemism that masks the actual savagery and nature of the pathology. And until we kind of get a handle on the fact that we are still traumatized and we are still pathological with this pathogen, this thing that creates pathological violence and pathological hatred, until we recognize that it's infecting us still, we won't ever be able to get a proper grasp on what the pathology is we're working with. Um, and what happened in Israel is not war; that's pathology. And what happens in the family courts is, pathology. It's the same violent strain that happens in our brain created by trauma. And whenever I enter a new domain of work, I read everything I can about that domain. What's the research say about that domain? So when I expanded from early childhood ADHD and into early childhood autism, more focused on that, I read everything about autism. When I worked with juvenile fire setters for this to develop an assessment protocol for them for Department of Justice and FEMA, I read it. I was working with um, an expert, the world's foremost expert in fire setting, Ken Feynman, and I was responsible for coming up with the assessment protocol for that pathology. I read everything about fire setting and I read everything about risk assessment. And that's what I do when I go into a new area. I read everything there is about it. So as I came into the family courts, I was reading all the forensic stuff that they do. I read, you know, Stahl Simon's book 2013, 2020. I've read their stuff. I've read all the research or opinion pieces in forensic psychology. But I also started reestablishing my knowledge of personality disorders, linking them into the attachment system and family systems, and getting all of that knowledge like put together. And that's my reference list for uh, um, my book, Foundations. But part of what I did when I got over here is I started to read up on evil. Okay, so this is your primary book, I think, Baumeister on evil that everybody refers to, but also Aaron Beck, The Prisoners of Hate, the cognitive basis of anger, hostility, and violence are prisoners of hate. And that. So I'm trying to find as much as I can about evil because this pathology is evil. It essentially the pathological, narcissistic, borderline, dark personality parent is killing the child of the other spouse in retaliation for the failed marriage and divorce. That the targeted parent used to have a child before the divorce, but then after the divorce, they don't have a child anymore. That psychologically, the allied pathological parent has killed that child for that parent in revenge and retaliation. That is the most horrible thing imaginable, to go and kill someone's child. That is just evil. That's just awful. And yet all the mental health people are just dead to it. It's just stunning, the absence of empathy for the targeted parent who's lost their child. And what they do is they say, "It's not about you, it's about the child." No, it's all about that. It's a spousal abuse pathology using the child as a weapon. And the child is a manipulated voice. Holy cow. And you're participating in the savage brutality to this parent, and you're participating. You're doing it. You're not stopping it from and these are the psychologist people who are supposed to be the ones protecting the parent. So this just is floors me, to the degree of the absence of empathy from psychologists to the targeted parent who's having the child killed like in front of them. They have to watch, the parents have to watch as their child gets all distorted and manipulated in this nasty scene, and nobody stops it. The psychologist just, and so they just have to watch the abuse and destruction of their beloved child. It's just devastating pathology, and it's like evil. And the research on the dark personalities book, the researcher and his colleagues identify this, the dark triad, dark tetrad, as the core of evil. That's narcissistic, psychopathic, highly manipulative, and sadistic. Yeah, that's a pretty evil human. That's probably the most malevolent human being on the planet. Narcissistic, psychopathic, manipulative, and sadistic. And that's what we have in Israel right now, Hamas. And you'll just see it on display. That's what we have in the family courts. That's what we have over in the Russia and in Ukraine. We have this dark, narcissistic, psychopathic, sadistic pathology. And I've written a blog and some blog entries on the terrorist mind, which is this pathogen in that variation, in the violent variation we see in Putin, in Israel, in 9/11, in school shootings, just in racist violence and lynchings. And it's the same damaged information structures in our attachment networks. And so trauma comes in and damages some specific attachment networks in specific ways. And then this damaged network that I call the pathogen, or these damaged information structures, then produce a characteristic pattern of symptoms, which is the pathological hatred, pathological violence, and it gets into delusional disorders and shared delusional disorders. And exactly what we see in the family courts is what we're going to see in the mind of Hamas. If you go over there, you're going to find, if you do a clinical interview with the people, the Hamas people, you're going to find the thought disorder. You're going to find the persecutory delusion. One of the things I think Aaron Beck says, it was brilliant, is that evil never thinks it's evil. Okay. Evil always thinks it's the victim, and it's protecting against the evil. And so, you get the righteous warrior kind of mentality that gets in this, that they are Hitler's protecting the world against, Jews, and the evil is protecting, supposedly, the racists are protecting the white race from, corruption or whatever. It's evil never sees itself as evil. It always sees itself as a victim. And that's what we have in the family courts. The pathological parent is, I'm being victimized. It's a persecutory delusion that comes off of all of this. So it's the same pathology. I think of it as those little molecule structures we used to build in high school where you have little balls and sticks and you can build a molecule. I think of it like that, is that you have different elements of the attachment networks and motivational systems. And this is a motivational pathology. The attachment system is a motivation. So as you think about it, this is a problem in motivation. It's a sadistic motivation. It gets gratification from causing suffering. That's a bizarre motivation. And it comes from this structure within the attachment networks. And then there's these little add-on things that we can put around, a little molecule of hydrogen or oxygen as the stuff that surrounds the basic structure. But if you change out some of the surroundings, you get the different variants. You get the independent lone school shooter. Well, that you switch out a few of the variants, but you got the basic core structure of the absence of empathy, the absence of a shared morality. There's a moral kind of destruction that takes place, and sadism. That's the critical component on the terrorist mind, is the sadism. It's a gratification from causing suffering. So what happened in Israel isn't about creating terror. That's not the terrorism is a misnomer. It's not about terrorism. It's about creating suffering in others, and that feels good. So you see some of the displays over in Israel about having captured people, and they kind of parade them around. They like causing the suffering, and they're going to do that a lot with the family members of the hostages and stuff, and family members of the deceased. And then the family members of the deceased in the Gaza, where when the destruction comes in there as a retaliation kind of stuff. Although all the grief there, there's going to be a gratification from causing the suffering, and that's the sadistic line. And sadism enters, just so you're aware, it comes from the sex abuse line. So we have unresolved sex abuse that's kind of moving through the pathology because we have that sadistic line. Um, yeah. So when I got over here, I began reading everything I could about evil, and there's not very much. Um, there's the malignant narcissist and things, but one of the places that led me to is the Lucifer Principle by Bloom, and I had also read Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene, and in chapter 11 he talks about memes like as genes. Now, this is a great book, and people should know what's going on biologically with us. This is more on the Robert Sapolsky kind of biological underpinnings of what we do. It's very useful to understand. We should be understanding that if you work in psychology. But in chapter 11, he talks about memes, which are idea units, and that evolution may not actually be working on the genes as much as it may be working on the memes at this point. Our ideas are evolving, and that there's a proposition that these meme structures, the ideas, are actually living things because they have all the qualities of life. They replicate, they're contained units. They, fill up every ecological niche and stuff. But he can make his argument for that. If you Google, I think I put in a link down here. If they Google Richard Dawkins and chapter 11 of The Selfish Gene, you'll get a PDF for it. And you can read about what a meme is. And that's a very useful construct because psychologically, we act based on our ideas. How we perceive the world and interpret that world then directs how we respond to what we perceive the world to be. So if we have distorted thinking and perceptions, then that will distort then our response to things. So understanding the meme structures, the idea structures of how we see the world is essential to changing what we do, and understanding what we do. Now, what we do is both based on our kind of stuff, but it also comes from the context that we're prisoners of context. We may want to do a lot of things, but if the context doesn't support that, then those things aren't going to happen. But as soon as the context comes to support something, then that thing happens. And so right now, we don't have the context of ideas necessary to solve the pathology in the family courts. People are still using parental alienation or that's dying away, but they don't have the proper ideas to understand the situation. They're looking at it custody. It's not custody, that's a symptom. It's a pathology. It's a shared persecutory delusion on one side, possibly child abuse on the other, but most likely it's going to be the shared delusional disorder and factitious attachment pathology. And but without that idea, without that understanding, then there's no solution available. But as soon as that understanding comes in, everybody goes, "Oh yeah, that's what it is," and it's child psychological abuse, and that's fundamentally the pathology. All this pathogen that we have is created in child abuse, physical, sexual neglect, psychological. And the variations to a degree are due to what type of trauma is rippling through that particular mind space that's happening. And it ripples through us from the parenting that is delivered to children based on these distorted thinking and perceptions. So when the trauma damages the attachment networks, that person then grows up to be an adult with a damaged attachment and then transfers that damage to the child in the distorted parenting practices that the damage creates. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the family courts. Narcissistic borderline dark personality was a child abuse victim. That creates the personality pathology that then imposes itself and creates the damage in the child's attachment networks in the next generation. So it just moves across generations. It's the transgenerational transmission of trauma. And that's what's happening in Israel and Ukraine and the family courts and in all these cases of pathological hatred and pathological violence. Racism, the LGBT, kind of stuff, the hatred and pathological violence directed there. Um, it's not normal, and I at some point the American Psychiatric Association, the mental health profession, professional psychology will understand that pathological hatred and pathological violence is not normal, and they'll create a diagnosis in the DSM for it. And it's going to be the sadism, absence of shared morality, absence of empathy. And basically, it's the dark personalities, dark triad, dark tetrad, more specifically. The damage that's caused to the child from the child abuse that leads to the narcissistic or borderline spectrum type of personality damage. It's unresolved trauma, and that's the best way to conceptualize it for treatment purposes. But for diagnostic purposes, the patterns from the narcissist and borderline are useful to apply. And there are two variants. So the borderline, I have a little bit more tolerance for because the damage within them still is trying to achieve love. They still want to be loved. It's just it's a mess on how they kind of try to get there because of damaged thinking and perception from the unresolved trauma. And so they're more workable because they're still within the human community, although kind of difficult. If we can get through the difficulties, then things can be resolved more completely. With the narcissist, however, they've sacrificed love for safety. And as a result, they've been able to structure up better, but they have no love inside. And the absence of empathy, which is characteristic of the narcissist, is the capacity for cruelty. And so that's Simon Baron Cohen on the research on empathy and cruelty. The two are just like that. The absence of empathy is a capacity for cruelty. And so if you look at Israel, you look at Ukraine, you look at the family courts, you look at any um, the pathological hatred expression, the solution is going to be empathy. That's going to be critical to get in there. High doses of empathy, and the empathy comes from an understanding that the children are belong to all of us. Okay, we can't separate out my children from your children. Because if I say, "Oh, my children are fine, but your children can be traumatized," then your traumatized children are then going to, shoot up my children, and they're going to they're going to traumatize over to mine, and it's all children. When, as a human community on this planet, if we were deciding to bring children into this world and into this life and into this planet, then we have an obligation to the children to make sure their life isn't traumatized, to make sure they have what they need to have a good developmental lifespan. And we're not very responsible as the grown up humans already here, because we're bringing in all these children and then just traumatizing them. And we need to stop doing that, because that's creating trauma for us. It's creating bad things for us. It's just creating Israel right now. And so we need to protect all children from all forms of child abuse all of the time. And that's kind of our obligation when we bring them to this planet and this world. And we're failing in that. So that's a bit of the reorientation of our thinking and perceptions. But one of the places to go for that is Robin Grill, Parenting for a Peaceful World. Grill's work is based on the work of Lloyd DeMoss, and you can Google DeMoss on the internet, and it's a history of childhood. And he did as much research as is possible from the history archives of what it was like to be a child throughout our course of our history. And the history of childhood is basically the history of child abuse. We used to kill them, and then we abandoned them, and then we beat them, and we just basically abused children throughout history up until about the 20th century. Then, and he identified 6 phases of our progress in understanding and parenting children better. And in the 20th century, we reached stage 5, which was the socialization phase. That's our behaviorism. Then we have to, teach children how to behave, because otherwise they're going to be these little squirrely, animal critters. So we have to socialize children. And then the 6th phase we entered into in the latter part of the 20th century. That's the developmental phase. And that's the first phase of our parenting where we've actually cared about what happens for the child. All the other 5 phases, it was all about the adult, the child meeting the needs of the adult in various ways. And the most recent phase is just to be quiet, be seen but not heard kind of stuff, get rid of their protest behavior. The 6th stage, the developmental stage, has to do with like our research that we've done on the child. What's in the best interest of the child? And that's the first time in history we've ever cared about that. And as our parenting especially in early childhood, but as our parenting improves with each generation, we traumatize our children less. And so their brain opens up more, they get better thinking and perception of the world, and we make our scientific advances and our social advances and economic and cultural advances. And so that's what Lloyd DeMoss does, is he looks at the history of childhood and then puts it right side by side with our cultural and scientific advances, and hypothesizes or makes the case that it's our changes in parenting that create our changes in society. And I agree. I think it's a persuasive argument from neurologically and socially, culturally, in a lot of ways. So, what our solution to Ukraine and in Israel and the United States and all its violence here, everywhere, Pakistan, and India, um, anywhere there's that pathological hatred or pathological violence, the solution is in our parenting with our children, and to stop brutalizing our children and providing them with um, the context that they need to become successful humans in their lives. Is because every time we traumatize a brain, it's going to shut down brain systems and it's going to create certain types of damage in the child. And sex abuse is the one that's the nastiest one, because that's going to introduce a sadistic line into the pathology, and it's because that the sexual violence against a child is not about sex, it's about the violence part. It's about domination and control and disgusting kind of shame, humiliation kind of stuff. That's all in the parent, but is being put in the child through this action. And so the child has to process that motivation or that nasty, dark stuff. And that kind of gets twisted up into the sadistic quality. Um, if it's in a woman, the sadistic quality kind of moves to her parenting with her children. If it's in a man, it kind of tends to spread out more into the violence we see, in the gratification in causing the suffering of others, domination, and control kinds of stuff. So the first step is to understand that there's no such thing as war. So I get over into family courts. I say there's no such thing as parental alienation. That's a euphemism to hide what it actually is, which is child psychological abuse. If we start calling it abuse rather than alienation, we get a whole different thing to do about it. We go alienation, ooh, that's bad parenting. We should maybe stop it, but nobody acts. If we say it, if we identify it properly, identify it and accurately as child abuse, then we, holy cow, we need to get in here and protect this child. And so it leads to two different outcomes depending upon how we think about it. And that's our ideas. Freud called it the transference. Beck calls it schemas. Okay, our internal cognitive schemas for how we perceive and interpret the world. Bowlby calls them internal working models of attachment. And Bloom, Dawkins call them meme structures, idea structures. And I like the idea of the meme structures because it's more specific. It's better to work with, and we can begin to parse out all the dangerous things on the ideas, and what is the feature of the idea that is particularly toxic or pathogenic. What is the meme structure that's involved? And then by identifying the meme structure on that pathogen, the idea structure that's creating the pathology, we can then target that for change and deactivate the overall pathogen. And so that's where I'm at. I'm deactivating meme structures and activating new ones, and I'm using the internet to do a lot of that because can dump the meme structures right into the memescape of your minds. And so I've been doing that for 10 years, changing the ideas that surround family court pathology so that we can change the family court pathology. We will respond differently. Now, one of the interesting things that Bloom talks about in the Lucifer principle, he identifies the meme structures within the Muslim faith right now, within Islam, that there's a particular strain. Now, it's not within Islam because Islam, when Europe was in the Dark Ages and with a bunch of brutal, savage barbarians, that they had the pathogen active in their brains. The Arab world and Persia and the Muslim world was the font of scientific advancement and tolerance. And so it's not the faith particularly. So, he points out Christianity had that during that um, crusade phase, this particular type of strain. a meme structure on the overall religious meme structure, meme structure that is particularly intolerant of other memes. So memes can be supportive of each other. They can be symbiotic. So you put two ideas together and they both bloom into a third stuff and other good stuff. So ideas can support other ideas or they can be predatory. And so a particular meme structure can come in and attack the other one. And so only one survives. And that's how they evolve. It's sort of they find their niche, they grow in symbiosis, or they survive from predation by other idea structures. So the idea that the uh, sun revolved around the earth and the earth was the center of things held sway for a long time. Then another predatory meme structure comes in from science and says, nope, the sun's the center, and because of all this evidence, and it eventually killed off the previous one, the you know um, Aristotle or Ptolemy, that the Earth was the center of the universe. So those uh, meme structures interact in various ways. The what Bloom identified is there's a particular one of these nodules attached to the overall structure that is particularly intolerant. And so it is extremely predatory of other idea structures. So if you don't believe that idea structure of this particular meme, then it's going to kill you. And literally, it's going to kill you. It will, you either believe this or you're dead. And you can see that in the Taliban, kind of stuff. You can see that in that extremism, and we can see that in the United States on the political spectrum as the Republican Party has just gone to this extremism that if you're not in that extreme thing, then you're not even a Republican. So Liz Cheney, you're out, because you don't have that extreme mindset. And it's not the conservative, it's not the Republican ideas. It's a particular meme structure that's attached to the ideas that gives it a particularly predatory nature. And so, as I look at the situation going on over in Israel, I see there's this pathogen in the mind of Hamas, and this is not war. And even the pathogen is in the mind of the Israelis as well, because they've been traumatized and they have that same kind of idea structure. Um, it's interesting as you look at the Israeli meme structure on this, because you're looking for that extremism kind of structure that kills off others. Well, they're saying that their country has to be a Jewish state, and yeah, I get it. They've been there, since biblical times and all that stuff. So there's a strong meme structure, strong ideas that captivate um, that belief system and that motivate towards that, um, making that reality that Israel is a Jewish state. However, it cannot be both a Jewish state and a democratic state, because the Palestinians could just outpopulate them, and then it becomes a Palestinian state simply because there's more Palestinians living in the nation. So Israel has to do things to suppress a portion of the population relative to democracy in order to remain a Jewish state. So they're going to be kind of in a bit of a problem around that going forward. How do you remain both a Jewish state and a democratic state? But also that at this point, how do you get along with the Palestinians that are with you and among you and around you? Um, and and so their response to that will be um, provoked and also kind of feed into domains of pathology that are available in people's minds. On the Hamas side, though, that's where you were going to find that particularly predatory meme structure that you had, that Taliban kind of stuff. Over in the United States, I refer to that meme structure of extremism that tolerates no dissent as the Christian Taliban, so that you have to believe the Christian values, and we're going to make all our laws based on these Christian values, and anybody who disagrees is going to be sent to prison or killed or something. And so it's that extremist mindset, and it's a particular meme structure. Once we understand that um, that what we do is not a product necessarily of our choices. It's a product of our biology. It's a product of our minds in which we live. Then how we respond to things or what we do takes on a different approach, a different attitude relative to understanding other people and working with other people and creating change in the world. And so this would be refer over to Robert Sapolsky and his work on motivations and our brain and what we do, and even around the idea of free will. That he doesn't think there's free will, and I agree with him. I think the evidence says no. What we are as people are containers for the experience of life. So we feel the pain, we feel the joy, we feel the fear, and that's our role, is to feel those things. And then our algorithms, our meme structures, then are applied to that informational field of all the experience we have. And then those decide how to respond. And those patterns within us that were formed by our childhood experience, that were formed by our current experiences, our thinking and perception about the world, then guides how we respond to it. And for traumatized people, traumatized brains, the thinking and perception has become deviant and significantly deviant. And that's where we begin to worry. And that's called a thought disorder. There's a problem in their thinking and perception that's creating deviant and aberrant behavior, such as killing other people. I will propose that killing people in any context is pathology. I saw a picture the other day of World War One, black and white picture of all these guys in England volunteering, for the army to go off and serve in World War One, and they all look proud and happy, not realizing what they were headed towards, which was the trench warfare and just the nightmare horror that was World War One. But World War One, we don't really have a bad guy in that war. It was just, Germany and France and England just decided to start killing each other and killing off their populations and their people. Why? The Germans aren't bad people. French aren't bad people. English aren't bad people. Why are you slaughtering them in such cruel and violent ways and causing the grief in their families? That's somebody's child. Why are you doing that? There's no reason for it, because that's just what we do. And they would march off all proud and the glory of war, of savaging. No, it's pathology. It's not war. And we need to take that euphemism away from our understanding. So, Israel's not at war with Hamas. They're going to savage and brutalize them. But part of what Bloom argues is that with this particular strain that is extraordinarily predatory, and I'll go back to like the Crusades and Christianity, it's the same. It's the extremist that tolerates no dissent, or it kills you, literally kills you. That strain, that meme structure, when that's attached, um, pretty much the only resolution for it is to like surgically remove it. And the moment you start thinking of this pathology as a pathogen, that as pathogenic structures that cause the pathology of pathological hatred and pathological violence, then the social medical response to a cancer like that, to a disease structure that threatens the health of the organism of human community, is to surgically remove it. Boom. And that's what, you know, Israel's going to try to do with Hamas. Unfortunately, I don't think it's surgically removable that way. It's just going to expand, because that's not the approach to getting rid of this particular pathology. It's going to be in our children. It's going to be, um, parenting our children is going to be the solution. It's going to be the solution. Ukraine and Russia. It's going to be the solution in the United States, and um, in moving forward with the health here, and then also in the Middle East. The Israelis are going to have to care about the Palestinian children, and in that way, develop caring from the Palestinians about the Israeli children. Um, as soon as we begin to focus that all children belong to all of us, and that we can't neglect anyone, because doing that will create the pathology we don't want, then we have the proper idea structures to then begin to formulate and create the solution. Um, the idea structure of us and them is, that's the destructive one, and we could live with that when we were back in primeval times, being hunters and gatherers, and everything was kind of spread out in tribes, and so there was our tribe or our community and group people, and then the outsider who may or may not be predatory. Other humans would prey on us and take our stuff, and so it was kind of dangerous, us or them. But nowadays, given the nature of how we've changed in our global community, it's just all us. And we're just all of our children, and we're just trying to do the best we can growing up in this world. And we need to get more empathy and bring empathy into the situation. One of the features about the family courts that's prominent is how you've been isolated away from other people and other concerns. So I'll read journals. I get journals from various clinical divisions I belong to, and just pay attention to the general flow of clinical psychology, child and family therapy, that sort of thing, attachment. And they have no idea you're here. You've just been entirely abandoned. There's no discussion of the family courts. There's no discussion of the problem in the family courts. Nothing. You just do not exist to clinical psychology. And that's the product of child abuse trauma. That's the experience of the child who's being abused, is that they don't exist. No one cares. No one rescues them. No one comes. And if you know about our foster care system, that's a pretty rocky road. When I worked in foster care, there were ideas being floated, out of New York, that the the Department of Children's Services would need to prove that foster care was better than the abusive home, because it was a serious question, and it may still be. I've been away for a bit, but as to whether foster care, because they're exposed to abuse in foster care, and the parents in foster care, God love them, there's a group that are great, but there's a group that are just doing it for the money too, and so it's a problematic system what's happened. But does anybody care? Do you care? Do you worry about what's happening over in no, you don't. Okay. I still do, but um, no, they're the abandoned children, the unwanted children. We don't care about you, and that's communicated to them pretty clearly and directly, that they are unwanted and abandoned. You're unwanted and abandoned. That's the child abuse experience that you're being put through. And Hamas, the children of the Palestinians, or the Palestinians have been. No one's paying attention to the grievance. No one's paying attention to the trauma that's being inflicted. So you get the protest behavior. Well, and it's a primitive form of empathy. If we don't provide that empathy for the experience, then they will create the same experience in us that they have. As now you see the suffering that I'm going through because you're suffering the same suffering. Oh man, that's can we stop that, please? Can we bring empathy prior to reaching that point? But it means caring about children. It means doing something, caring about the people who are suffering. Um, and if we don't, then we're going to get the traumatized people who raise kids who are traumatized, and we're going to get the pathological hatreds and pathological violence of the world. The So with that, I think I've pretty much covered the domain that I want to cover today, which is that this is an evil pathology. I'll cite to book Dark Personalities as being the core of evil, narcissistic, borderline, um, psychopathic, highly manipulative, and sadistic. And it's a constellation of personality pathologies. It's in the family courts, it's undiagnosed and untreated. And so there's active child abuse and active spousal abuse in the family courts. And the profound absence of empathy from professional psychology is stunning. The abandonment by the APA and by professional psychology of the parents in the family courts is blatantly obvious. Nobody's over here, nobody's solving things, and their ethical standards of practice and professional standards of practice are absolutely at the bottom. Um, so, uh, the features or what I'm doing um, relative to this pathology is I'm bringing the ideas that are necessary to solve it. Nobody listens because they've got their own structures and their own motivations, their own thinking and perceptions that are motivating what they do. The moment the field in the family courts reorients to this being child abuse, then things will change dramatically as we begin to respond to the child abuse of the narcissistic borderline dark personality producing a shared delusion in the child and false attachment pathology. The moment we do that, though, the moment the professional psychology acknowledges this is child abuse and spousal abuse using the child as a weapon, then they admit that they haven't done that for 40 years and that they've been participating in the child abuse and participating in the spousal abuse big time for 40 years. And that's when the shame comes to all the forensic psychologists who've been in the family courts for 20 years or whatever. And you say, big puffy Vita, and you say, I've been working as a forensic. Well, you're the one who's been participating in the spousal abuse and child abuse because you're ignorant, incompetent, and unethical. So we're going to clean house on the former Nazi party members. Hopefully, we will identify some of the top ones and hold them accountable for what they did. They should be held accountable for their failed experiment. But for most of them, they'll scamper away and blend back into professional psychology. No clinical psychologist will work in the family courts. It's too dangerous over here. I'm saying be ethical, and I'm getting sanctioned by the licensing boards that nobody wants to solve the pathology over here. And until that happens, clinical psychology, there's no reason I should put my license on the line. Personally, I'm an old guy. I'm just trying to get to that door up ahead, and then I'm just trying to get out of here. And this is my career. This is my profession. And I'm having to put it at risk to solve a pathology. When I'm saying people should be ethical and people need to be competent, and the licensing boards are sanctioning me for saying that, it's too dangerous for any clinical psychologist to be over here because it's just no rules, no procedures. and they haven't worked with a family court pathology for 40 years. So they're not competent. So if you bring an attachment person over, they're not competent in personality disorders or family systems or delusional thought disorders. You bring a delusional thought disorder person over, they're not competent in attachment pathology or the family courts or personality. And so none of them have the necessary domains of competence because the field has been neglected for 40 years and exploited by the forensic psychologists and their failed experiment. So I know the angry is out there in the family courts. That's my role, is to carry the angry and the hard lines so that you parents don't have to. You shouldn't have to explain the pathology to the doctors. The doctors should already know. I'll explain it to them if they're ignorant, but you shouldn't have to do that. But you do, given the nature of the situation and given that you're locked into trying to rescue your specific child, you have to do what you have to do. And so, good luck, and we'll see if we can get you the mental health support that you need. Good luck. Consultation is the approach that will navigate that. They don't have the competence, but if they get consultation, that will up their competence, and they can do this sort of stuff. But the brutality and the absence of empathy for the parents in the family courts um, needs to be carefully examined. And as you parents, though, resolve the pathology or the systems problems in the family courts and get people to focus on this and actually get professional psychology to develop the self-reflective insight as to what happened, as well as the understanding for what the nature of the pathology is over here, you will also be helping professional psychology solve the problems in Ukraine and solve the problems in Parkland and solve the problems in Israel and solve the problems, um, you know, across the board. In terms of pathological violence and pathological hatred, because it's all the same thing. And a critical issue is our parenting, and how we parent our children will change the world. And we always repair. We always repair the relationship. We need to understand the power of discord and what to do about it. What do we do about it? We bring empathy. Empathy, the family, and the core of social justice. That's the APA paper presentation in 2019. Empathy, the family, and the core of social justice. I give you little breadcrumbs along the trail. If you open up those three meme structures as a package, it'll be rewarding for you to do. So with that, I'm going to head back to my Sunday of getting reports written and work and kind of processing what's happening around us. So with that, take care, everybody, and good luck out there.